So, as Frank said, I'm not a climate scientist or really any sort of scientist. I'm a philosopher, but I'm a philosopher of science, which is to say that I study the character of scientific reasoning and want to study whether scientific claims are justified. So I don't have any graphs or slides today to convince you that climate change is real. In this crowd, you don't need them. There are other folks who are better qualified than I am to convince you of that if you need convincing. So you already understand that there's a scientific consensus on climate change. Importantly, you also understand that when we're studying an empirical matter, the scientific evidence is all that should count. Not our ideology, not our politics, not how we make our living, or how we feel about the issue. But the problem, even if we accept that in this room, is what to do about the people in the world, including a shockingly high percentage of folks who serve in the United States Congress, who don't believe this, and who feel entitled to substitute their own judgment for the consensus of the world scientists, kind of unbelievably, on this topic. Now, as a philosopher, I've always felt a little bit handicapped in what I can contribute to this topic. And some of you know that philosophers customarily think of themselves as having a good grasp on reasoning, but they don't like to weigh in very much on topics that are of particular importance to folks in the modern age, in the pressing issues of the day. I decided several years back that I wanted to eschew that because I was interested in how scientific claims were justified, and I was horrified by the number of people who felt free to look at the scientific evidence on any number of topics and say, well, I just don't believe it. As if that were somehow an argument, or somehow that didn't make them look ignorant, or if somehow that was supposed to convince someone else. It was shocking. So I'd done this other work on the science of human behavior. And then I looked up and I saw that natural science was under attack. And it was under attack by people who just refused to believe things, even when it was in their face, which is called denialism, not skepticism. Denialism is what I'm going to talk about today. So my most recent book is called Respecting Truth, in which I examined the intellectual roots of science denialism. That led to the piece that Frank read in the Chronicle. It also led to a piece in the New York Times about the difference between skepticism and denialism. That brought me some hate mail. And I was saying earlier, that also brought me my first hate phone call. If you've never gotten a hate phone call, it's really personal. Hate phone calls, I mean, you can just hang up on it, but it's just sort of unbelievable while it's happening. But it also, maybe resulted in getting the invitation, so maybe that's not so bad. So, skepticism is something that philosophers care about a great deal, and scientists too. But the problem lately is that word, skepticism, if you follow the media, has been hijacked by a whole group of climate change deniers who suddenly decided that they like the ring of how it sounds to say that they're a skeptic. It just sounds so dirty to call yourself a denialist. Nobody would want to call themselves a denier or a denialist because a Holocaust denier, other things a denier. No, we don't like that word. So let's call ourselves skeptics. And in fact, some of them, such as Ted Cruz, have recently put forward the idea that they're the ones who are actually being scientific. He recently more or less compared himself to Galileo, which is unbelievable. He said that until all the evidence is in, we just can't know whether climate change is real, that it's just a theory that hasn't been proven, and we've heard this about other topics. That, however, is to reveal a grave misunderstanding not only of how science works, but also of what it means to be a skeptic. Skepticism is when we withhold belief because the evidence doesn't live up to the high standards that we require, for instance, in science. Denialism is when we refuse to believe something, even in the face of what others would take to be compelling evidence, because at some level it upsets us to think that it's true. With skepticism, we're not sure what to believe because the evidence hasn't compelled us. With denialism, we know damn well what we hope is true, and may even shop for reasons to think that our views are correct. Now, in the throes of denialism, I imagine that it must feel a lot like skepticism. The rest of the world just doesn't get it. We're the ones being rigorous. How could all those other people who believe in climate change be so gullible before all the facts are in? But I think that if you find yourself feeling that way, say about another topic, it should be a warning when those stars align and you start to feel really self-righteous about a topic like that more than you do about good standards of scientific evidence. I don't know how many of you might have read Daniel Kahneman's recent book, Thinking Fast and Slow. But it's a terrific book talking about how the human mind has all sorts of wired-in shortcuts, which can feel an awful lot like thinking. Within the dark recesses of cognitive bias, there are entire fields of academic inquiry, behavioral economics is one, that proposes to explain huge swaths of human behavior based on these mental foibles that we've always had in Galileo's time before. These have been there. What's different now is that there are entire television networks that are devoted to exploiting these cognitive foibles so that we begin to live in this kind of tribal silo where we just hear things back that we already believe and we're not challenging ourselves with other beliefs. So how do you tell a fact from an opinion? How do you tell skepticism from denialism? What I maintain is that by the time you sit down to evaluate the evidence for a scientific theory, it's probably too late. The real battle comes in training ourselves to embrace the right attitudes about belief formation in the first place. And for that, I think, of course I would, you need to do a little philosophy. What does it mean to be a denialist? Some people start off by saying, well, I'm no scientist, but there's actually a page in Wikipedia called, well, I'm no scientist, but. Don't look it up right now, as I tell my students. But you can look that up, and it's kind of and I didn't start, it's kind of an interesting page. So they'll start off, climate change deniers will sometimes start off by saying, well, I'm no scientist, but, and then they'll proceed to rattle off a series of evidential demands that would make Newton blush. What normally comes along for that ride is a telltale sign of denialism, that these alleged skeptics have different standards of evidence for the things that they want to believe than for the things that they don't want to believe. Now, we all know that the worst culprits here are conspiracy theorists, and denialism comes close to that. How many times have you heard a conspiracy theorist claim that we've not yet met a sufficiently high standard of evidence to believe some well-documented fact, such as that vaccines don't cause autism, and then immediately exhibit complete gullibility that the most unlikely correlations are true. For instance, that the CDC pays the Institute of Medicine to suppress the data on thimerosal. So that's what conspiracy theorists do. Complete gullibility on the one hand, complete denial on the other hand. And so this fits with the denialist pattern. Unlike the true skeptic, the denialist beliefs are not born of caring about evidence in the first place. What they care about most is ideology, and they'll do seemingly anything to protect it. This is why you see all of the cheating about scientific standards. So here I'm going to quote something from Ted Cruz on his position on climate change from August 2015. He said this, quote, if you look at the satellite data in the last 18 years, there has been zero reported warming. Now the global warming alarmists, that's a problem for their theories. Their computer models show massive warming that satellites say ain't happening. We've discovered that NOAA, the federal government agencies, are cooking the books, end quote. You know, there are some climate scientists in the room. I've got the graph over there, I don't have the slides, but no, what's wrong with that? But let me say a little bit about philosophically what's wrong with that. So, for one thing, the graphic he's referring to is wrong, and it's since been corrected. All right, that happens sometimes in science, but here's the real problem. Even if that graph is the correct one, he's misreading it because he's dishonest. Ask yourself why he chose 18 years. Okay, what was happening exactly? It was 19 years ago now, but what was happening exactly 18 years ago? Notice he didn't say 20 or 19 or even 17, he said 18. And he did that because 1997 was a very hot year in El Nino, and it suited his purposes to choose that because it made the rest of the trend look not quite so alarming. If you look at the new graph, it's still plenty alarming, but if you look at the older graph and you read it right, it's alarming, but it's a little bit flatter. So that's why he did it. He's cherry picking. That is not what scientists do, and that's not what skeptics do either. Cherry picking is one of the worst sins of data manipulation that a scientist can make, and climate change deniers do it all the time. Again, they like that ring of sounding like a scientist or skeptic, so they'll quote some facts at you, but they're normally cherry picking. And they do it because it makes them feel so virtuous, I think, to be citing actual evidence. Few scientists, though, would make that kind of error of cherry picking because they're schooled in the lessons of statistics and taught not to put theory ahead of evidence. But to an ideologue like Ted Cruz and others, it just feels perfectly natural to do this. The problem is that given the way science works, we leave ourselves open to this kind of misunderstanding. Okay? And this is something I have to own as a philosopher of science, because philosophers of science have not done a good enough job, I think, in making it clear to the public how science actually works. In some sense, the climate change deniers are right about the way science works. It's not yet completely settled, and the idea of global warming is based on a scientific theory. But this is not due to any particular weakness in the study of climate change, because no theory, no science on any topic is ever completely settled. That's just how science works. Because science is based on empirical evidence, it's always possible that any theory can later be overthrown. Just ask Isaac Newton. As for the role of theory, as a matter of fact, gravity is also a theory. It's just a theory. So is the germ theory of disease. But we don't find these same kind of arguments made there. Again, it's cherry picking. They're using an argument where it fits. There's an important difference between a theory and a hypothesis. Just because it's technically true that any theory can be overthrown by new evidence, it doesn't mean that we're justified in disbelieving the scientific consensus on climate change. To disbelieve the overwhelming conclusion of scientists on a well-corroborated theory like global warming does not make one a skeptic, it makes one a fool. Scientific truths can never be completely verified. Like any other scientific theory, evolution, continental drift, vaccines, the Big Bang, there are always going to be holdouts, always going to be people waiting for that last shred of evidence. Talking to somebody earlier about the fact that there's only 98% consensus on evolution. But this is among scientists. So there's that last 2% we're holding out. I guess the last 150 years of evidence is not good enough, and they're waiting for that last 2%. If those holdouts have scientific evidence for their beliefs, we have to listen to them. But if it's just wishful thinking, I think we're justified in moving on. There is such a thing as warrant for scientific beliefs. We're justified in believing a scientific theory, even if it has not been conclusively proven, because no theory in science has ever been conclusively proven. That's just how inductive reasoning works. And unlike ideological commitments, scientific theories are never 100%. That's why scientists are skeptics. And that's one thing that I want people who are climate change deniers to understand, that that's actually how science works, and that that's the strength of science. The problem here is that denialism does not seem based on a good faith commitment to any sort of actual skepticism, but it's instead based on a grave misunderstanding of how science works. There's a vast difference between the sort of scientific skepticism that I've been talking about and the kind of faux skepticism that's embraced by denialists. In science, we look at the evidence before we form our views, but we also leave ourselves open to the possibility of changing our views over time as more and better evidence comes in. With denialism, one decides in advance on the basis of what we hope is true, and then look for evidence to prove it. And that's very different from science. So, given all that, in my book, Respecting Truth, I argued that denialism starts with willful ignorance, which is when you're not only ignorant, but you make the decision to stay ignorant. It's when the facts are available, but to cover my book, I've got a bunch of people covering their eyes, they choose not to look at them, despite widely available sources of information. not surprisingly, that sort of willful ignorance normally occurs for ideological reasons. Now, sometimes it starts off as cynical. Sometimes we know that our view isn't true, but we just can't admit it in public. This happens sometimes amongst politicians. They call it paying crazy tax. Maybe Ted Cruz doesn't really believe what he believes, but he can't say in public. It also, one of my favorite quotations on this subject is from Upton Sinclair, who said, "It's pretty hard to get a man to believe something when his salary depends upon him not believing it," which maybe explains all those ExxonMobil executives. What I found in the course of researching my book is that if left unchecked, what happens is that sooner or later, maybe they do begin to really believe it. Maybe the cynical denialism becomes actual denialism. If we tell a lie long enough, and we surround ourselves only with those who already agree with us, sooner or later the lie seems true. This is amply shown in Kahneman's book. I think, though, he was spooked by Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propagandist, who said, if you tell a lie long enough, people will begin to believe it. In any case, the dynamic here is that I think, my argument is that there's a slippery slope from telling a lie to believing your own lie, to beginning to believe that anybody who doesn't accept the lie has to be crazy. And I think that that's where we are, unfortunately, in the climate change debate, and that's denialism. That's when you haven't caught it in time, and what started as willful ignorance ends up as denialism, and at that point you're not even listening to facts anymore, and so argument may not help. So how do you stop the slippery slope? You have to get there in time. You have to challenge those who are lying and get to them before they've told a lie too many times, when they still know that they're lying, when there's a chance to stand up to them. You have to witness their attempts to obfuscate and to spread the lies to other people, which is, I think, kind of what we're trying to do today, which is why I'm so glad to be part of it. But there's another, I'm going to close with another aspect to willful ignorance, which it's harder to accept, but I'm going to leave it as a challenge to everybody in the room, because willful ignorance and denialism can occur about a lot of topics, not just climate change. And you may even harbor some willful ignorance yourselves about some topics that maybe you don't want to talk about. So I want to leave you with this challenge. The tendency toward willful ignorance exists in all of us on some things that maybe we wish weren't true. So how to fight it? Study critical thinking. Study logic. I'm a philosopher, I have to say that. Read Kahneman's book. Identify the cognitive weaknesses that are part of the human condition, but also recognize that this is not necessarily our destiny. Just because we have all those cognitive foibles doesn't mean that we can't overcome them. We overcame them in Galileo's time. We can overcome them now as well. Even if our brains are not wired to search for truth, this does not mean that we can't pursue a path that leads us to better answers than the ones that are automatically supplied by the fast part of our brain. Truth may not be automatic, but it's still an option. But you have to choose that path about not just climate change, but any other things where you might be living well.